I think it's imperative that if we hope to have powerful relationships, and even in relationships that are important to us, that we learn how to communicate effectively because it's fair and right to give the other party an opportunity to correct the behavior. You've often heard me and other people say that we train people how to treat us. So if people are treating you unfairly, it's probably because you've allowed it. Men, stress is something that every single one of us deals with on a daily basis, whether it's a job loss, dealing with a struggling relationship, financial issues, medical issues, or any number of things that we as men deal with on a regular basis. It's crucial that we learn how to manage stress because that's going to help us succeed in life. It's going to help us overcome trial and hardship and adversity. It's going to help us communicate more effectively with the people that we love and build and forge deeper friendships, whether they're romantic or partnerships or just friends. And so we're going to share today some strategies that you can employ in order to manage your stress more effectively and be more effective in your day-to-day life. I'm sure, like me, that you are not interested in being stressed out to the max all the time and having anxiety over certain things. But if you're anything like me, there's sometimes a looming sense of stress and anxiety and worry and frustration about the future and the uncertainty that it holds. There's also a lot of fear associated with that as well. These aren't issues that we as men often talk about. If, again, you're anything like me, I don't want to appear weak. I don't want to expose any sort of vulnerabilities or flaws or deficiencies in the way that I show up. But I also know that it's crucial that we talk about it and we address it. Because if we don't, we're not willing to acknowledge what we personally are dealing with, then obviously we're not going to be able to correct the situation appropriately. So I will say this before I get into it, excuse me, that as I share these things, I hope it comes across in the spirit in which it's intended, and that is to say that I don't have everything figured out. I deal with these issues just as much, if not more, than maybe you do. And I don't want to make it seem as if I'm putting myself ahead of the pack or that I know better than you. I might have a certain level of success in some aspect of life that's further down the track than you are, and I'm sure that you're more successful at elements and aspects of life than I am. The whole point of Order of Man is to help each other. And so I need to be honest with you with my own shortcomings, and I attempt to do that. But I know also at times that it might seem as if I have this all figured out, and I certainly don't. I've often said that I'm the biggest recipient and beneficiary of the work that we're doing, and oftentimes I use the podcast and my social media channels as a live interactive journaling practice for me. It helps me flesh out ideas. It helps me communicate those ideas. Certainly, I have the opportunity to hear from other people who are connected with what we're doing, whether that's positive or negative, and it depends. And there's a lot of variability in the world of social media, but I use this almost as a personal journal. So as I share these things, I want you to know I don't have them all figured out, but these are things that have helped me. And if they help you, great. And if they don't, maybe there's something else that I've shared or somebody else can share that will help you manage your stress or any other topics that we address more effectively. So guys, let's jump into this with all of that said. I'm just going to go through, excuse me. I took a drink right before the podcast and ended up going down the wrong pipe. And so I might be struggling with that a little bit. But as I was thinking about what I wanted to talk with you about today, I identified the 5 W's. I didn't identify, but I'm going to use the 5 W's, the 5 questions, which are what, who, where, when, and why. We're going to break down each one of these questions as it relates to stress. And within each one of those questions, I'm going to share some tactics that I've used, sometimes with maximum efficiency and effectiveness, and sometimes not, but strategies that I've used that help me manage my stress. So the first thing that we need to talk about is what? All right, what is it that is stressing you out? Is it a scenario at work? Is it a lot of doubt and fear of what the future might hold? Is it a feeling or a sense of inadequacy? Are there certain people that are stressing you out? Is it your environment? Is it your time? Maybe you don't have a whole lot of time, or maybe you don't feel like you're performing to the level that you know you should be performing at. Guys, if we can't first and foremost identify what in the world is stressing us out, it's going to be very difficult to do anything else about it. So what I would suggest, and what I've done in my own life, is that I try to document these things when they come up. And I spend a lot of time being mindful about when I get stressed. So take some time, really think about before jumping into solutions. A lot of the times if you were to post, and I did see this post in our Facebook group, which you can find at facebook.com/groups/Order of Man. A lot of the times what you'll see is somebody will say, well, just go to the gym, train jujitsu. In other words, get yourself busy and distract yourself. And there's certainly validity to that. I don't want to say that you shouldn't do that. Those are strategies that you can certainly employ. But if you're not coupling that with other opportunities to address the stress at a deeper level, then it's very difficult for us to actually address the issues, and they'll eventually rear their ugly heads again. So we do have to spend time thinking about what stresses us out. The next thing to consider is who is stressing you out. There's a lot of people in our lives that we deal with, and a lot of them are loved ones. A lot of them maybe aren't loved ones, but we're obligated to be in some sort of relationship with them. That could potentially be an employer, or a client, or a colleague. And so there's people in your life who are going to stress you out. It's the way they communicate with you. It's their attitude. It's their demeanor. Maybe it's even their personality. And there's just some clashing there. What I would suggest is, again, we're documenting all of this stuff. We're writing it down. And as you identify people in your life that are stressing you out, you need to consider, is this somebody worth continuing to have in my life? And if it's not, then you need to consider moving along or allowing them to move along. And I'm not just talking about romantic relationships. I'm talking about clients. In my financial advisory practice years ago, there were several clients that I just stopped working with. Now, I communicated that effectively and told them that I can't serve them the way they're looking to be served. And it's scary when you lose somebody, whether it's, again, a romantic relationship or a client that is bringing an income to you. But I can assure you that life does get better when you remove these people from your life. Now, that's on one end of the extreme. But there's another opportunity here when you have people who are stressing you out, and that is boundaries. I've talked a lot about establishing healthy boundaries, and so you can go to orderofman.com and in the search bar, type boundaries and find probably a dozen podcasts on the subject that I've done over the past 9 years. Guys, we have to have healthy boundaries. The way that we will be communicated with, the way that what we will tolerate, what we won't tolerate, how we expect other people to treat us, what we're willing to invest in certain relationships, employment relationships, client relationships, romantic relationships, and even friendships, what you're willing to invest and what you're not willing to invest. And then to be able to clearly communicate that with other people, not from a place of spite or vengeance or out to get them, but a place of healthy dialogue and communication. I think it's imperative that if we hope to have powerful relationships, and even in relationships that are important to us, that we learn how to communicate effectively, because it's fair and right to give the other party an opportunity to correct the behavior. You've often heard me and other people say that we train people how to treat us. So if people are treating you unfairly, it's probably because you've allowed it. So if you want that behavior to change, I would suggest that you give that person an opportunity to change their behavior. And the way that you do that is by communicating effectively the way in which you will and will not be treated, and giving them the opportunity to change the way they communicate with you. And the hope and the goal would be that they do change, and that it becomes more effective, and that it becomes a better, more healthy relationship. And anybody who loves you and cares about you and wants to pour into that relationship is likely to be, at least at a minimum, open to the idea of change and improvement and development. So when it comes to boundaries, spend some real time. And I think it's important you document these things. all too often we believe we're addressing these things. And I know I do. I believe I am. And then something happens and I realize, oh, maybe I haven't addressed that as deeply as I need to. So really spend some time journaling, documenting, writing these things down so that you can be able to communicate them effectively. The third W in this series of questions is where. Where are you when you're the most stressed? Now, I'm kind of a clean freak. I'm a neat freak. I like things organized and structured. I have a way that works for me. It may not work for everybody, but I have systems and processes in place that work well for me. I tend to get very stressed when I'm out of my element, when there's clutter and there's chaos and there's noise, when I'm in an environment that has too much going on. I even notice that I get stressed out when people that work with me, for example, and that I've hired to manage certain aspects of the business will give me 17,000 things to work on. And that stresses me out. That's my personality. I need one thing, maybe two tops. Give me one thing. If you put me on one thing because of my personality, I know that I will go all in on that thing and tackled it to the nth degree. And when that's done, give me the second, then give me the third, then give me the fourth. And so I've structured my life in accordance with that. I know that when I get so much going on my plate, I shut down. And so I've learned to not put so much on my plate and do less, but do it better. But there are things that need to get done, so I delegate those things. And I have other people do those things so I can focus on the things that are important to me. And that way, everything gets done and accomplished. But take a look at your environment. Take a look at where you are. Take a look at your office. Are you stressed when you go into the office? Okay, that's a good indicator that something's going on there. Is it purely the environment? And if it is, what can you change about your own personal environment to make it better for you? Is it somebody there that you have to deal with? And if it is, what boundaries can you put in place? And how can you learn to communicate more effectively in order to change that? That goes back to our second question, who? But think about where you are. And you might even notice themes and trends. And what I would suggest is if you can, keep yourself out of those environments. And if you can't, then foster and facilitate a more healthy, productive environment based on your personality. And the last point here, guys, is why. This might be the most important question. And this is the one that I think I struggle with the most. And it's probably the one that most people struggle with. You know, often we know we're stressed out. Maybe we're rushed for time. Maybe we're short with people. Maybe we make comments that we don't really mean. Maybe we let certain situations get to us and we react emotionally as opposed to responding to what we're experiencing. And it's our response is not an appropriate response to some of these things. And we think, well, maybe just do these surface level things like, go to the gym or just like move your body or get distracted with something else. And again, to go back to what I said earlier, I think there is validity in that, but we have to do the deeper work. And this is something that I am doing and something that I know I need to continue to do and actually dive in deeper into it and get better at it. So what are these things? Well, the first thing when we're talking about why is really trying to delve down into what is happening psychologically, right? So is it change? For a lot of people, myself included, change produces a lot of anxiety and stress. Okay, well, that's important to know. Not only because it can help me address not having to change and being more in a stable environment, but also help me deal with the change when it inevitably occurs. And it will. You'll have a new relationship. You'll have a new job. You'll have to move somewhere. You'll have a death of a loved one. You'll have a financial issue. You'll have a medical diagnosis. Change is inevitable. So we need to be able to manage this more effectively. So it could be change. For me, there's a lot of fear that comes with not knowing what the future holds. And I'm a bit of a control freak. I know that about myself, and I'm sure a lot of you are as well. And one thing I know that I do is I attempt to control things that are beyond my control. That helps me have, or at least feel like, some sort of false security because I'm trying to control and manipulate everything. I'm trying to learn how to let go. And as I do learn to let go and lower my expectations for other people, lower the expectations that I have for the way I think it should be, and let the things beyond my control play out, the more fulfilled and happy I am, the more calm and at peace I am. So is it fear of uncertainty and worry? Are there deeper issues going on? Is it feeling like you're a failure? Now that one isn't really something I don't believe impacts me too much. I have failed in my life, and sure, I feel some guilt and shame over the failure that I've experienced, but I think for the most part, I'm able to drive on even after I do fail in certain aspects of life. But there's other deeper issues like fear of abandonment, fear of being alone. Like the abandonment issue, that's one that I personally deal with. Am I going to be abandoned? And so what do you do about this? I mean, that's the real question. So we've got what stresses you out. We've got who stresses you out. Where are you when you're stressed out? When are you stressed out? And then why are you stressed out? So how do we actually begin to uncover the answers to these questions? Well, I think there's probably, I would say maybe 4 to 5 standard practices that work. And one of them, I think at a base level, is a little bit of a distraction technique. We've talked a little bit about this already, is you just may need to get yourself out of the environment. If you're stressed out because you're dealing with a deadline, completing the task is part of the way that you reduce that stress. Now, I know for me, I get stressed out when I have so much on my plate, like I talked about earlier. And so the best strategy for me is to break those things down into bite-sized, actionable items. So if I've got this huge, daunting task or project, I can break that down into 10 or 15 subtasks because I work best when I have that order in place. So part of managing stress is identifying what's stressing you out and then actually tackling it. That's one option. That might not work all the time because there might be some non-tangible that you're stressed and anxious about that you can't just check off a list. Like we talked about with the fear of uncertainty or fear of failure or fear of abandonment. You can't just check that off a list. Some things you can do where you're just distracting. Okay, so go work out. Blow off some steam. That might help. Go to jujitsu. Go for a run. Usually something physical, for me, it works the best. It allows me to sweat. It allows me to focus on the thing right in front of me instead of having to worry about the thing on my mind. And it changes my environment to an environment that I actually enjoy being in, which is the gym. So that distraction technique works. But there's some other things here too. One is journaling. How often are you actually spending time every day writing these things out, documenting these things? And a lot of people will say, well, Ryan, I'd like to journal, but I don't know what to talk about. There's no right or wrong way to do it. What I would suggest is just come up with a question. How did you feel today? What was the best part of your day? What was the worst part of your day? Why was it those things? What about today stressed you out? When you were at peace today, why was that the case? If you could take one lesson from today that you learned that made today valuable, what would that lesson be? These are all questions that I can come up with on the fly that you can do as well that help you with some prompts of writing some things down. Hey, I was stressed about this, and then go deeper. Like, don't just write I was stressed. You already know that. Write down why you were stressed. Well, I was stressed because I had a difficult conversation with my boss and he wasn't happy with my performance. And now I have a lot of fear about the stability of my job. That's fair. That's a fair reason to be stressed out. So the question then is, again, in your journal, well, how'd you handle it? Well, I lashed out and I made comments that were inappropriate to my boss and now my job is at risk. Okay. Probably not the best way to handle it, but at least you identified what was going on so you can correct the behavior moving forward. Or maybe you say, hey, I handled it pretty well with my boss, but now I took all this stress out on my wife or my children. Okay, again, that's an important thing to consider because you don't want to continue to do that for any length of a period of time. And you might have some apologizing to do. And I've had my fair share of apologizing, and I try to be quick to apologize, but I'd rather not have to be in the position of having to apologize. I'd rather just have correct behavior moving in the first place. And I think journaling and writing some of this stuff down can help you be a little bit more mindful. I don't think just thinking about it is enough, but journaling is a really, really powerful way to do it. And then the last question I would ask in that scenario with the journaling is I would say, well, what am I going to do now? I was stressed because I had this uncomfortable conversation with my boss. I didn't receive it well. And now what I need to do is go back to my employer and apologize for my behavior and give him an action plan for what I'm going to do to correct my performance and then actually do it. So journaling, that's crucial. Also, having an outlet of friends, brothers, family members, people that you know love you, and also people who will be honest with you. Again, I'm going to go back to something I said earlier. We train people how to treat us. So if people are unwilling to give us feedback, healthy, honest feedback, because of the way that we respond, they're going to be less likely to do that in the future. And I want people to be honest and truthful with me, even if it's hard to hear. So I have to be careful about the way that I respond when somebody does tell me the truth or is honest with me, because I don't want to create an environment where people aren't comfortable talking to me. That isn't a way for me to learn what I need to learn, and it isn't a way for me to build healthy relationships with people that I love. So having other outlets like friends, family members, brothers who you can rely on, who care about you, who want to see you win, who I could call on a moment's notice. And there's a handful of people that I have. And I do call these people and I ask for advice and I tell them what I'm dealing with. And it's not always easy or comfortable because we as men have been conditioned not to do this, but there are people like that in my circle and they're invaluable. The next, and this is not something that I personally do, so I'm not going to speak much on this, but I know a lot of people meditate. Maybe I'm doing it wrong. Maybe it's just not conducive to my personality, but there's a lot of people who have this ability to sit in stillness and not really think about much in a particular moment and just be present with where they are. And it brings a sense of peace. It gives them an opportunity to see things from a perspective maybe they haven't considered before. And I'm sure there's a lot of different ways to do this, from certain breathing techniques to sitting down in a quiet place to sensory deprivation tanks and float tanks and things like this. I'm not really going to speak on it because I haven't done this much. And if you guys are interested in it, I can certainly find an expert in these types of meditation practices that would help us, myself included, use that as a powerful method for reducing stress and anxiety. Another one, spirituality and prayer. You know, sometimes we get so locked into our day-to-day activities that we forget that there's something bigger at play here. There's something else going on. And it's crucial that we take a step back from the day-to-day plays and we actually think about, what is my purpose here? Because if we know what our greater calling and purpose is, the things that we sometimes get wrapped up in may not be that big of a deal in the grand scheme of things. And having that eternal perspective and a pathway, a communication with God, or if you prefer to call it the universe or the muse, or however you choose to look at it, I look at it as God. So I have this ability to communicate with my creator, and it helps me have a different perspective of my time here. And the small things that seem big in the moment, through that eternal lens, are in a better perspective for me so I can manage it more effectively. And also for me, knowing that the way that I show up in life is going to have an eternal impact helps me make better choices. Now, I'm not here to say that I always make the best choice, but when I do have that eternal perspective, it helps me make a better choice. So prayer, reading scripture, going to church, these types of activities that are going to give you that new perspective. And the last one I want to share with you is counseling. You know, this one's a bit taboo in the men's space or community, whatever you want to call it. I personally, and I don't talk a whole lot about this, and I think part of the reason I don't talk about it is because of that taboo, if I'm being honest. It's hard for men to admit that we are getting that kind of help. But on one hand, I know it's hard, and on the other, I also know it shouldn't be difficult. No professional athlete is ashamed that he hires a coach to help him with his strength training or his nutrition or to have a better shot or whatever. Nobody bats an eye at that. Nobody bats an eye at having a business coach. Nobody bats an eye at having spiritual guidance through a pastor or a preacher or something along these lines, some sort of clergy. But when it comes to having somebody to help us work out the mental side of our performance, it becomes a little more difficult for myself included, maybe more so than anybody else. So I do have a therapist that I see on a monthly basis, and I share some of the things that I struggle with, and I share some of those issues. And that person gives me a better, more well-rounded approach to what I might be dealing with, helps me consider where some of these issues might be stemming from, and a perspective in how I might be able to better approach these things. So I think I'm going to be a little bit more open about that aspect of things because it is something that I personally do, but I just don't really talk that often about it because of the stigma. And maybe even, if I'm being frank about it, the perception that I have of not wanting to appear weak. And admittedly, it is interesting because I have this podcast where I've interviewed close to 500 high-performing individuals. Again, I don't feel bad or a stigma associated with bringing somebody in to talk about whatever it is that they're going to talk about, their expertise, and sharing that with you and myself. I've even had therapists on the podcast, John Kim, John Deloney, these men who come on the podcast as therapists, offering advice on how to work out our emotional or our mental struggles. And yet when it comes to meeting with somebody individually, one-on-one, there's more of a stigma associated with that. Now, what I'll say is that I think the best approach is a combination of a few or all of these. I don't think, for example, that hiring a therapist is going to solve all of your problems. And I also don't think that just going to exercise is going to solve all of our problems. I don't think journaling is going to solve it all. I don't think just acting without thinking about any of this stuff is going to solve it all. I think if we want to have a successful relationship, a successful business, a successful life, however that looks like for you, then we need to take a well-rounded approach to managing our stress and anxiety. Now, we didn't even get into the negative physical ramifications. We know that increased cortisol levels reduce testosterone, which will hinder your performance as a man. So there's a lot of physiological response to stress and anxiety that we should be aware of. And I can talk more about that in the future. In fact, I probably have to bring somebody on to talk about the nuance and the intricacies of that. But I know through the limited information that I have, when our cortisol levels spike, then our testosterone levels reduce and we start initiating that fight or flight response, which creates emotional reaction versus logical response. So there's a lot of reasons why practically we need to learn to reduce stress and anxiety as well. And again, I'm not the first, but I am going to be more transparent, I guess I'd say, in letting you know that these are all issues that I struggle with. And the reason we called this podcast and this movement Order of Man and not Order of Ryan is because I realized that immediately, even before we started doing this over 9 years ago, that I needed just as much help as anybody else. And that's what we're going to attempt to do. And that's what we have been attempting to do. So we're going to continue to work on it. We're going to continue to improve, and we're going to do it together. And what does that look like? Well, at a minimum, you're listening to this podcast. At a maximum, you can join our exclusive brotherhood. That's the Iron Council. We're having more conversations like this. You can go to one of our events. In fact, we've got one this weekend. As of the release of this podcast, I am in Southern Utah with 20-ish, 25 other men talking about these things and other things in order to be more successful men. So there's a lot that we can do here, guys. And I'm going to continue to provide the resources, but it would be helpful for me if I knew what you were interested in talking about and what you're interested in hearing about and who you're interested in hearing it from. So I'll do a little recap here and then I'll close it out for the day. So stress management strategies, we're going to go to the 5 W questions. Again, what, who, where, when, and why. What are you doing when you're stressed? Who are you with when you're stressed? Where are you when you're stressed? When are you stressed? And why? Why are you stressed? And then we talked about the stress management strategies, actually tackling the project that's making you stressed, talking with friends and family members and colleagues and coworkers, journaling. We talked a little bit about meditative practices, although I didn't get into that because that isn't something I'm proficient with. So I don't want to speak out of my ass on that one. Your spiritual connection, prayer, church, scripture study, and then counseling, coaching, therapy, etc. So I hope that serves you in some way. I hope that helps. And I hope you take this information and put it into practice. It's not enough to listen to this 30-minute podcast and say, okay, good, I got a handle on it. I'll just do that. I'll just do what Ryan said. You actually have to take these things in a systematic way and have a plan for putting these things into practice on a regular and consistent basis. And that is something I should mention too, at least for myself, as I've noticed, and I think this is true universally, that you don't just learn how to manage stress and then you're never stressed again. Like you don't achieve stress management. It's a maintenance plan. You need to stay on top of this because it will rear its ugly head. And I've had experiences in the last week even where I've let stress and anxiety make a bigger deal of things that weren't really there. And I'm not interested in living my life like that. And I'm not interested in putting that on other people and creating hardship for other people either. So take that for what it's worth. I hope it works for you and I hope you apply it. And then we will be back next week. Until then, guys, go out there, take action, reduce stress, learn that stress management strategies, and become the man you are meant to be.